Why did a retired German shepherd refuse to leave the roadside? Why did he keep staring into the woods like he was waiting for something or someone? One frosty morning in Oregon, a battered pickup dumped him and drove off. But what this dog found next, deep in the forest, left rescuers speechless and saved a life. This isn't just a story about abandonment. It's about instinct, redemption, and an unspoken bond. Equals, what do you think the dog was searching for? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that restore your faith in humanity. The morning frost clung to the pines like a promise not yet broken. In the upper reaches of Dewstone County, Oregon, a rugged corner of the Pacific Northwest hemmed by ancient firs and fog, winter arrived quietly, without storm or drama. The sun had barely breached the low slate sky, casting a dim pewter hue across the Blue River Highway, a two-lane road so forgotten by GPS systems that only locals still trusted it. The air was thick with wood smoke and silence. And then came the truck. It was a battered navy blue Chevrolet C/K, the kind that had long outlived its dignity. Rust bloomed along the fenders. The engine coughed like a smoker waking from troubled sleep. The truck pulled off to a narrow clearing near mile marker 82, where a gravel shoulder spilled into wild grass and fern-laced underbrush. No one else was around. When the tailgate dropped, the sound was sudden, sharp metal splitting the silence. And then he appeared. The dog moved slowly, one step at a time, as if each motion had to be remembered rather than instinctual. His name, though he wouldn't hear it spoken again that morning, was Briggs. Briggs was a German shepherd, roughly 9 years old. Age weighed in his joints, but not in his eyes. He was large and powerfully built. His sable coat faded by time and duty, and the faint white under his chin betrayed more winters than his gait suggested. His left ear had a permanent fold, an old scar from a roadside IED during his second deployment. His right hind leg was slightly stiff, a limp hidden under stubbornness. But it was his expression that struck most: calm, alert, and terribly human. Briggs was no house pet. He had served 4 tours overseas as a tactical K-9 with the 85th Military Police, trained in detection, restraint, and field rescue. He had smelled out explosives in desert ruins and dragged bleeding men through rubble. His last handler, Sergeant Kyle Danner, had been the closest thing he ever had to family. Kyle had spoken to him not like a dog, but like a brother in arms. But Kyle was gone. An off-duty accident. No plan. No will. And the VA hadn't known what to do with Briggs. Technically property, they'd said. So here he was. As the truck reversed and sped away in a cough of gravel and exhaust, Briggs didn't chase it. He didn't bark. He simply stood, his breath steaming in steady clouds. His ears twitched at the retreating engine, his eyes locked on the curve of the road as if it might bring back the sound. But it didn't. The only response was silence. Time passed. Perhaps 10 minutes. Perhaps 20. The cold deepened. From the trees, a flicker of movement. A red squirrel, fat and irritated, barked from a branch before vanishing again. The wind picked up. A gust tore through the glade, tugging pine needles loose in spiraling dances. Briggs didn't move. His paws sank slightly into the thawing ground, and a thin whine, barely audible, escaped him. But even that faded quickly. He sat, then lay, still facing the road. He waited. About 3 miles down the highway, Caleb Travers, a bearded gas station attendant with a trucker cap and an orange vest, leaned on a mop and watched the security feed from Pump 4. Caleb wasn't a complicated man. A failed musician turned weekend mechanic. He preferred dogs to most people and mornings to most hours. So when he saw the truck on the feed, pulling away fast after a stop just out of frame, he made a mental note. Something felt off, but he said nothing just yet. Elsewhere, in a small ranger cabin on the edge of the Dewstone Wildlife Preserve, a woman stirred awake before her alarm. Nora Whitlow was 39, lean and long-limbed, with crow's feet starting to fan around her moss-green eyes. Her dark auburn hair was always tied back in a low bun, tucked beneath a faded ranger cap she never replaced. She dressed in muted forest tones, greens, browns, grays, and moved like someone used to silence. Nora wasn't unfriendly, just distant. Since losing her son in a boating accident 7 years ago, she'd withdrawn from most people. Her husband had left 2 years later. Friends stopped calling. She found more comfort in trees than in therapy. Most of her conversations were with birds or creek water. She kept a handwritten logbook with entries no one else read. That morning, she made coffee over a gas flame, laced her boots, and stepped out onto her porch just as the wind shifted. Something felt wrong. Briggs stayed in the same spot for hours. Cars passed, 2, then 3, but none stopped. Eventually, a silver Subaru with 2 college students slowed. One of them, a young man in a hooded sweatshirt, snapped a photo. "Dude, that dog's just sitting there," he muttered. "Is it okay?" The passenger asked. "I don't know. Probably just a farm dog." They drove off. Briggs didn't lift his head. His body was tired, but his eyes remained sharp. He scanned every curve of the road. Not for food. Not for shelter. For that one truck, that one sound. But it didn't return. Not that day. Not the next. But something in Briggs had already shifted. His waiting wasn't just for Kyle anymore. It was for meaning. For what to do next. And somewhere, beyond the mossy veil of fir trees, the forest waited too. The second morning broke colder than the first. A brittle frost coated the branches like glass, and the creek running beneath the narrow footbridge outside the Dewstone Ranger cabin had frozen along the edges, its gentle babble silenced in jagged ice. The sun had not yet burned off the low clouds, and the entire forest glowed faintly blue, a world not yet thawed. Inside the modest one-bedroom ranger station, Nora Whitlow stirred a second spoon of powdered creamer into her mug and stared at the monitor. A new alert had just pinged on her trail cam system. Camera 3B, positioned half a mile north of Blue River Highway. She clicked on the live feed, half expecting a raccoon, maybe a coyote. Instead, there he was again. The dog. Briggs stood in the clearing like a statue, backlit by mist, head raised toward the tree line. No leash. No collar. He hadn't moved much since yesterday's stills. But this time, he was facing northeast, toward a dense ridge that led deeper into the preserve. Something about that direction, about the way his ears pricked and his weight shifted, made Nora's gut tighten. She minimized the feed and leaned back, staring out the window. Dewstone had many stories buried under its soil, bootlegger trails, crash planes, old miner graves, but most of them didn't move. This dog, however, was doing something, and she needed to know what. Before she could grab her jacket, the radio on her hip crackled. The dispatcher from the county office sounded breathless. "Unit 4, Nora, you there?" Nora clicked her receiver. "Go ahead. We got a missing child report, just came in. Name's Lila Greer, age 5, possibly wandered from makeshift camp up along Miller's Ravine. Mother claims she stepped out for firewood, came back, and the kid was gone. Father's not cooperative. County's sending a deputy, but they won't be up your way for another hour." Nora closed her eyes briefly, her voice low but firm. "Send me the last known coordinates. I'm heading out." By the time she loaded her day pack and laced her boots, the sky had shifted from blue-gray to a pale cream, thin sunlight peeking through frost-stiffened branches. She stepped off the porch, her notebook tucked into her jacket pocket, and made her way toward Camera 3BS location. As she moved through the pines, her breath clouded around her like a ghost. 300 yards off the main trail, Nora found the spot. A thicket of black spruce rising like spears around a clearing. Frozen mud bore fresh tracks, small, light, likely from a child. And just beside them, paw prints. Large, deliberate, German shepherd. Nora crouched and ran a gloved hand along the track. "What are you doing, old boy?" she whispered. Behind her, branches cracked. Briggs emerged slowly from the shadows, moving with stiff caution. His breath came in long exhales, forming clouds that rose and disappeared like quiet signals. His fur was damp, slightly matted around the haunches. Nora didn't reach out. She knew better, but she held her ground. Briggs stopped a dozen feet away, head tilted slightly. His eyes, dark amber and alert, met hers. "You saw her, didn't you?" Nora said softly. He blinked once, and then turned, trotted up a slope, and stopped, looking back. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. As Nora followed, her thoughts drifted, not just to the missing girl, but to a name carved in wood back home. Eli, her son, 7 years old when the river took him. She still remembered the weight of his backpack, soaked and cold, when the search team handed it back. She had kept the patch, a dinosaur in a ranger hat, the kind they gave kids on the forest tours. Sometimes, she still found it in coat pockets and cried without warning. Since then, she'd lived quietly, methodically, routines instead of risks, trails instead of people. But this dog and this child were waking something in her. They moved for nearly 40 minutes, past fallen trees, over mossy roots, along deer paths carved into hillsides. Briggs was tireless despite his age, pausing only to sniff or confirm direction. Nora marveled at his precision. This wasn't random searching. It was a trail, and he was following it. They stopped at an overgrown fire pit, the ashes still faintly warm. Candy wrappers fluttered under pine needles. Nora scanned the ground. Crumpled paper, a child's mitten, muddy handprints on a log. She radioed in, logging coordinates, then turned to Briggs. He was staring into a narrow gully that dipped into shadows. Before Nora could move, another sound reached them, a branch cracking, then a rustle. She held her breath. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. Not the child, a man. He was tall, maybe 40, gone in a way that suggested speedball addiction or long-term hunger. His clothes were torn army surplus, jacket 2 sizes too big, boots without laces. His eyes darted over Nora, then Briggs, calculating. "You the ranger?" he asked, voice rough. Nora nodded slowly. "Looking for a little girl." "She ain't here." He sniffed. "Ran off yesterday. My girl said she'd be fine. 5-year-olds bounce back, right?" He laughed once, sharp and bitter. "Lila's your daughter?" "Technically. Not my week to watch her, though, right?" Briggs let out a low growl, not loud but steady. The man took a step back. Nora stood her ground. "Do you know which way she went?" "She kept following the dog," he muttered. "Kept saying he was showing her somewhere special." "Where?" He shrugged. "Ravine, maybe. Kids love climbing rocks. Good luck." He turned and walked off, vanishing between trees before she could stop him. Briggs had already begun moving again, down the slope toward a cluster of moss-covered boulders. The ground grew wetter, shadows deeper. Nora followed in silence, clutching her flashlight and noting the increased chill. They moved until the gully narrowed, and there, at the base of a fallen tree, a blanket, purple with cartoon stars, and a faint, high-pitched hum. Nora rushed forward. Lila was curled under the tree, her cheeks pale, fingers blue around a stuffed bear. She wasn't crying. She looked up, blinking slowly, her lips forming a whisper. Doggy came back. Briggs stood nearby, ears forward, body still. Watching, Nora knelt beside the girl, checked her pulse. Weak but steady. She cradled Lila in her arms, wrapped her in her spare thermal blanket, and radioed for emergency evac. Briggs didn't move until the helicopter arrived. By dusk, Nora sat on her porch again, mud still caked to her boots, wind in her hair. Across from her, Briggs lay curled beneath a cedar beam, eyes closed but ears still alert. The child would live. She had been hypothermic, exhausted, but saved because one old dog refused to stop watching the woods. Nora took a sip of tea, heart oddly full. For the first time in years, the ache didn't crush her. It filled her, quietly, like a bell that had finally been struck again. Snow had started to fall again the following morning, silent and steady, draping the trees of Dewstone in delicate shrouds of white. The wind that rustled through the branches was softer now, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In the pale morning light, the world seemed reset, pure, clean, and unknowing. Nora Whitlow knelt beside the half-frozen stream bed just past the Miller Ravine ridge, one gloved hand outstretched. The imprint was faint, nearly lost to the crust of overnight frost. But it was there, small, deliberate, and unmistakably human. A child's boot print, pointing deeper into the woods. Beside it, Almost protectively, the heavy tracks of Briggs pressed into the snow with quiet authority. He stood nearby, his breath fogging the cold air, ears forward and alert. His dark coat dusted with flurries, Briggs looked like he belonged to this landscape, silent, loyal, and resolute. He had not made a sound all morning, but his movements were purposeful. He wasn't just wandering, he was leading. Nora reached in her coat pocket and pulled out a small knitted hat, purple, rimmed with frost and damp along the edge. She'd found it caught on a branch 20 yards back. It still held a faint warmth, or maybe those are memory playing tricks. Either way, it reminded her too much of the hat Eli used to wear on cold hikes. It made her chest ache, the way certain smells or songs do. Briggs approached, his paws crunching softly, and sat at her side. His head tilted slightly, as if sensing the tide of thoughts beneath her stillness. Nora let out a breath. "All right, partner," she said, voice hoarse. "Let's go see where this leads." Together, they stepped off the main trail and into a part of Dewstone most rangers avoided. Locals called it the Shadow Slip. Stories of rogue bears, old sinkholes, and missing hikers had given a reputation. Most of the tales were folklore, but enough of them had threads of truth that even the boldest avoided it without backup. Nora hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she tightened her scarf and followed Briggs into the dense firs. Elsewhere in Dewstone, a man in a worn brown uniform stood hunched over a public phone inside an empty diner. Deputy Cole Wexler, 33, with sandy blonde hair, a weather-beaten face, and a crooked nose that hadn't healed right, was doing his best not to curse aloud. His patrol car had broken down 3 miles back, alternator gone. No radio signal this deep. And now the only person who had responded to the missing child call was Nora Whitlow, of all people. He knew Nora, not well, but enough to know she carried her grief like armor. She was competent, focused, but she didn't like to work with others. And Wexler, a former National Guard medic who'd moved back to Dewstone to care for his aging mother, had learned to respect silences, especially hers. Still, something about that missing girl and the strange reports about a military dog roaming alone didn't sit right with him. He dropped a few quarters into the receiver and called in a favor to a friend at Forest Services, an old friend named Gwen Ellison, a GIS specialist with curly gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and a tendency to chew pens when thinking. Gwen was semi-retired, but knew Dewstone's topography better than anyone alive. He gave her the GPS coordinates from Nora's last transmission. "I'll pull the 3D terrain maps for the Shadow Slip Ridge," Gwen replied briskly. "But if they're down there and get caught in a snow pocket, they won't have long." Back in the forest, Nora and Briggs navigated a series of broken ridges and narrow rock passages. Trees here grew close, tangled, limbs clawing at them like skeletal fingers. The light dimmed. The snow deepened. Every so often, Briggs paused to sniff the wind, ears twitching. Nora started marking their progress in her logbook. Noon. Temperature, 26 degrees. Visibility, moderate. Still following faint tracks. Dog continues to lead. No sign of wildlife aggression. No sign of Lila, yet. She stopped as Briggs lowered his head and growled. The sound was low and constant. Protective, not hostile. She raised her binoculars and scanned ahead. A break in the trees revealed a shallow, cave formation, a small overhang with scattered debris in front. Broken branches, disturbed snow, wrappers, and a tiny plastic spoon. Nora's heart clenched. Briggs moved ahead, slow and cautious, stepping between fallen logs as if sensing how fragile the world was here. She followed, tightening her grip on the pepper spray canister clipped to her hip. Inside the shallow cave, it was warmer, barely, but enough for someone small to seek shelter. A blanket was tucked against the far corner, along with a drawing scribbled on the cave wall in purple crayon. A dog, a stick figure, and a sun with a smiling face. And then they heard it, a sound like a hiccup, faint and dry. Lila was there, hidden beneath the blanket, pale and shaking but conscious. Her face flushed from cold, her lips cracked. She looked up, blinking with glassy eyes. "I waited," she whispered. Nora dropped to her knees, unzipping her coat, wrapping it around the child. "You're safe now, baby," she murmured. "You did so good." Briggs sat by the cave entrance, still alert, watching outward. Nora pulled out her emergency radio and raised Wexler's frequency. Found her. Alive. Hypothermic, but responsive. Preparing for extraction. By late afternoon, Cole Wexler had arrived with snowshoes and a sled stretcher. He said little, simply nodded at Briggs before carrying Lila gently to safety. Gwen's terrain maps had helped them avoid a sinkhole Nora never knew existed. She made a mental note to update the Ranger Trail registry once she got back. As they loaded Lila into the sled, Nora turned to Briggs. "You didn't just save her," she said softly. "You brought me back, too." He didn't react, but he stayed close as they climbed back toward the ridge. The storm arrived before dawn, ushered in by a wind that screamed through the pine hollows like some ancient spirit unsettled. Nora Whitlow stood at the cabin's window, mug of black coffee clutched in both hands, watching the trees bend under the weight of snow. The radio had warned of whiteout conditions by evening, and already visibility had dropped. Everything beyond the porch blurred into a gray-white smear. Briggs was gone. He hadn't returned the past 2 nights. Nora tried not to let panic root in her chest, but it crept in, slow and bitter. The last time she saw him, Briggs had watched Lila being loaded into the Ranger truck, then disappeared into the woods, silent and steady, like a soldier finished with his duty. At first, Nora thought he'd wander to find shelter or follow a scent. But now, as hours passed into days, she feared something worse. She checked the satellite feed Gwen had helped her patch in. Nothing. The shadows were too thick under the tree canopy. So she did the only thing that felt right. She grabbed her parka, strapped on her boots, and followed the path Briggs had taken so many times before. The wind howled through the ridges as Nora trudged uphill, retracing familiar prints half buried beneath fresh snow. The air stung against her cheeks. Her breath came out in ragged bursts. After an hour, she reached the bend near Old Holler Ridge, a section of forest not officially mapped, known among locals for its dense thickets and strange rock formations. It was here, against a rise of charred boulders and tangled brush, that the smell hit her. Smoke, faint but unmistakable. Her pace quickened. Within minutes, she saw it. A small hunting cabin, or what remained of one. The roof had partially collapsed, and one wall was blackened, sagging inward. The structure looked abandoned for years, but steam still rose from the timbers. Something had burned, recently. Nora stepped closer, covering her mouth with her scarf. Her boots crunched over scattered debris, scorched bedding, splintered wood, melted plastic. And then she heard it, a sound so faint she thought it was the wind at first. A breath. Shallow. Rhythmic. She pushed open what was left of the door, hinges groaning in protest. And there they were. In the corner, barely sheltered beneath a half-fallen beam, Briggs lay curled around a bundle of blankets. His fur was singed along one side, and blood had dried in a thin line across his shoulder. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched at her entrance. Wrapped in his body's curve, barely visible beneath the soot and fabric, was Lila. The child was alive, but pale, lips blue, her tiny hands tucked under Briggs' chest. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Nora dropped to her knees. Oh my God! She didn't remember reaching for a radio, but her fingers moved on their own, calling in a medevac. The nearest chopper was still an hour out. She checked Briggs next. His pulse was thready. His paws were blackened, and his right foreleg was twisted at a strange angle, likely broken during whatever chaos had unfolded here. Still, his eyes opened just enough to meet hers. That unblinking loyalty. That calm. You stayed, she whispered, fighting back tears. You didn't leave her. Meanwhile, across town at Dewstone Clinic, Dr. Evelyn Hart stepped into the nurse's station carrying a clipboard and a large thermos. She was a tall woman in her early 50s, with neatly braided silver hair and stern gray eyes. Known for her no-nonsense bedside manner and unwavering ethics, she'd run emergency responses for over 2 decades in the region. Her late husband had been a rescue pilot, lost during a wildfire evac 10 years prior, a loss she rarely spoke of, except through tireless service. When Nora's call came through, Evelyn was already prepping the trauma bay. She said a dog shielded the girl, the nurse asked. Evelyn nodded. That's what I heard. Load the incubator. Set up oxygen and warming blankets. And prep a sedative. If that dog's conscious, he'll be in pain. The snow thickened as Nora cradled Lila in her arms, kneeling beside Briggs. Her body shielded them both from the wind, though her fingers were going numb. Time slowed to heartbeats. A voice in her mind, one she hadn't heard in years, whispered, "Please, please don't take them." She didn't pray. Not since the accident. Not since Eli. But now, she pleaded, not to a god, just to something, anything. Then, from the sky, the thump of rotor blades. The medevac hovered overhead, flurries flying as it lowered toward the clearing. Nora waved, arms stiff, her scarf flapping like a flag. Two rescue medics rushed forward. Sam Delaney, a broad-shouldered man with gentle hands and a thick black beard, and Kara Mills, a petite redhead with a tattoo sleeve and a calm voice that could steady storms. They took Lila first, then Briggs, carefully loading both into insulated carriers. As the chopper lifted off, Nora climbed in last, eyes never leaving the dog. At the clinic, warmth hit like a wall. Lila was rushed to the pediatric bay, and Evelyn herself oversaw Briggs' treatment. Hours passed. Nora paced the waiting room until she was called. "Lila's stable," Evelyn said. "You found her just in time." "The dog," she paused. "He lost a lot of blood. We've stabilized him, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Nora nodded, throat thick. "He's a soldier. He's been through worse." Evelyn smiled faintly. "He's earned every scar, hasn't he?" That night, Nora sat beside Briggs in the kennel wing. He was hooked to fluids, a soft wrap around his injured leg. But he was breathing. She reached into her coat and pulled out Eli's dinosaur patch, placing it beside his paw. "You did what I couldn't," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You brought someone back." The snow had stopped falling 3 days ago, but the cold still lingered in the corners of Dewstone like a stubborn ghost. Ice clung to the shaded sides of cabins, and the wind held the sharpness of early spring reluctant to arrive. At the clinic, recovery came in slow, quiet ripples. Lila had been moved from intensive care to a pediatric room with sunflower decals on the walls and warm yellow blankets. She was regaining color, voice, and appetite, asking daily when she could see the big dog again. Briggs had survived. He bore the ordeal with the same unshaken silence he had worn through every tour, every explosion, every moment of fire and fear. But the damage to his right leg was severe. Dr. Evelyn Hart had done what she could, performing a stabilizing surgery with the help of her assistant, a quiet veterinary student named Micah Boone, a lanky redhead with freckles and nerves of glass. Now Briggs walked with a slow, limping gait, strong in will, but weakened in form. His body had endured, but part of his mobility was gone. He would never run the way he once did, the way he had when Nora first saw him. Still, each time Lila came by in her hospital socks and clutched his ears in tiny hands, he let out a low, grateful rumble. The peace didn't last. On a cold Monday morning, 2 people arrived at the hospital front desk, a man and a woman, both lean, both anxious, both wearing clothes that didn't match the weather or each other. The man had a chiseled face with hollow cheeks and a jaw speckled in uneven stubble. His denim jacket was unzipped despite the cold, as if wearing it was more for show than use. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the front desk. The woman stood behind him, clutching a faded teddy bear. Her brown hair was scraped into a ponytail, so tight it made her thin face look sharper. She was pale, and her knuckles whitened with every passing minute. "We're here for our daughter," the man said. "Lila Greer." The nurse at the desk blinked. "And you are?" "We're her parents." "That should be enough." Nora was in the hallway when the call came over the intercom. She froze mid-step, heart pounding with something bitter and familiar. A part of her had known this day would come. She'd prepared herself, at least she thought she had. She stepped into the waiting area slowly. Briggs, leashed at her side with a harness to aid his balance, followed on quiet paws. The woman, Jessica Greer caught sight of them first. Her face twitched, something between recognition and fear. The man, Tyler Greer, turned fully toward them, eyes narrowing. "You the ranger?" he asked. "I am. We came to take our daughter back. Thanks for babysitting." Nora looked at Lila's mother. Her eyes darted. Her fingers tightened around the teddy bear. "She needs her parents," Jessica whispered. "She needed them when you left her in a burned-out shack," Nora replied. Tyler's expression darkened. "You don't know the whole story." "I know enough," Nora said. "And I have the footage from the trail cam that caught your SUV turning off the highway 3 nights ago. I know that you dropped her there and never came back." Jessica's lips trembled. "We were scared. People were coming after us. We thought maybe someone would find her faster if..." "If what?" Nora's voice cracked. "If you abandoned her? If you left her in the middle of a snowstorm with nothing but a blanket and a stuffed bear?" Tyler stepped forward, but Briggs let out a low growl, not loud but primal. The man halted, sneering. "This isn't your decision. This is a legal matter." "You're right," Nora said, "and it will be decided in court." 3 days later, in the Dewstone County Courthouse, Judge Alvin Rourke presided over the hearing. He was an older man, stocky, with a bald head and a pair of round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. Known for his fairness and temperate demeanor, Rourke had overseen custody disputes before, but none involving a war dog and a woman with no surviving children. Nora sat on one side of the courtroom, flanked by Evelyn and Deputy Cole Wexler, who had submitted his report on the scene where Lila was found. Jessica and Tyler sat on the other, their court-appointed lawyer, a bored man in a loose suit, fumbling through half-hearted statements about stress, addiction, and regret. When Nora was called to testify, she stood without notes. "I did not give birth to Lila Greer," she said, "but I found her when she was half frozen in the woods. I carried her through the storm. I stayed with her through the night, and I have not left her side since. I lost a son 7 years ago in an accident that broke everything I was. I don't believe in replacing grief, but I do believe in second chances. For her, and maybe for me too." Judge Rourke peered at her over his glasses. "And the dog? His name is Briggs. He's a retired canine. He protected her. He got her through that fire. He knew where she was when no one else did. If he hadn't led me there, she would have died." Rourke leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Do you wish to be considered for guardianship?" "I do," Nora said, voice steady. "I want to adopt her." In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jessica sat slumped on a bench. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and the teddy bear sat forgotten on the floor. Tyler paced a few feet away, angrily kicking a trash can and swearing under his breath. Evelyn approached them quietly. She didn't speak, just stood beside Jessica and placed a folded pamphlet on the bench. Information about a recovery center, one she'd helped fund years ago. Then she walked away. That night, Nora returned to her cabin. Lila's coat hung on a hook beside the door. A small sleeping cot had been set up near the fireplace, and Briggs, bandaged but upright, settled beside it, tail thumping once. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside it was warm. Spring crept into Dewstone quietly that year, arriving not with fanfare, but with the softened sound of thawing earth and the scent of pine warmed by sun. The snow was gone now, melted into the moss and roots, and the creek behind the ranger station sang again in full voice. Green pushed its way back into the world, brave and slow and certain. Nora Whitlow stood on the back porch of the cabin, a mug of coffee in hand and a wool shawl wrapped over her shoulders despite the warmth in the air. She was thinner now, but stronger in ways no one could measure. Her dark auburn hair was looser these days, and sometimes she even wore it down. There was a softness to her expression that hadn't been there last winter. Less armor, more openness. A giggle cut through the morning stillness. Lila was barefoot in the garden, chasing butterflies with a net too big for her hands. Her cheeks were rosy, her knees smudged with soil, and her curly hair had grown longer, tumbling down her back in wild strands. Her laughter had become the sound Nora woke to each day. Near the porch steps, Briggs lay curled in the sun, one foreleg bandaged, but healing. He didn't chase squirrels anymore, didn't leap over fallen logs or patrol the boundaries of the woods. But his eyes followed Lila everywhere. When she laughed, his ears twitched. When she sat still, he crept closer. He had become her shadow, her sentinel. The choice had been made weeks ago. The court had granted Nora full guardianship of Lila after both biological parents failed to complete rehab or show up for hearings. The judge's signature had come with little fanfare, but Nora still kept a copy of the paper on her kitchen corkboard, pinned beside Eli's dinosaur patch. That morning, a package arrived at the ranger station, delivered by Officer Janine Clark, a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her early 40s with a strong New England accent and a love for crossword puzzles. She was no-nonsense in her duties, but had a fondness for animals she rarely admitted aloud. "This came for you," she said, handing over a manila envelope with the emblem of the National Canine Rescue Alliance on the corner. Nora raised an eyebrow. "I didn't apply for anything." Janine gave a rare smile. "Doesn't look like you needed to." Inside the envelope was a letter, hand-signed, with official seals and language carefully composed. It recognized Briggs for extraordinary service and civilian rescue in active crisis. The letter was accompanied by a silver engraved tag and certificate. But more than that, it included an unprecedented clause. Briggs was to be named the first honorary lifetime resident of a United States Ranger Station. No longer just a dog, a protector, a recognized hero. Nora stared at the letter for a long moment, then knelt down next to Briggs and clipped the new tag onto his collar. The old one, his military ID, scratched and worn, still hung beside it. "Well," she murmured, scratching gently behind his ear. "Looks like they finally caught up to what we already knew." Briggs let out a soft exhale, warm and patient. Later that day, Nora allowed herself to be part of something she normally avoided. A local journalist, Maya Keller, came up from Bend to take photos for a community feature. Maya was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and fast-talking, with a passion for untold stories and a Nikon camera she treated like her second heart. She'd heard about the fire, the rescue, the court case, and the dog. "I promise I won't turn it into a circus," she said. "But people need this. People need something good." Nora hesitated, then nodded. The photo was simple, unposed. Nora sat on the porch, a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, hands folded loosely in her lap. Lila knelt beside Briggs, one arm wrapped gently over his back, her face lit by the afternoon sun. Briggs sat tall, stoic, regal, and still, eyes focused on something just beyond the camera. That image went viral within days. It spread across social media, newspapers, and newsletters. It ended up on coffee shop bulletin boards and hospital waiting rooms. The caption read, "Family is who stays when everyone else leaves." Messages poured in, from veterans who missed their canine partners, from parents who had lost children from foster families, and from people who just needed something beautiful to hold on to. Some came in person. A retired firefighter and his teenage son drove in from Idaho to thank Nora for what she'd done. A third-grade class from Montana sent hand-drawn thank you cards to Briggs, each with pictures of stick dog heroes. A quiet man named Ernesto Alvarez, a former dog trainer with a silver ponytail and a limp, arrived one day to donate a custom mobility harness for Briggs. "It's not about fixing what's broken," Ernesto said softly. "It's about making the broken parts useful." Nora wept quietly that evening, reading the cards aloud to Lila, who listened from under a blanket fort with Briggs curled beside her like a great watchful wolf. Weeks later, as the wildflowers bloomed along the footpath behind the station, Nora added something new to the trail signs. At the fork where the path split, one leading to the creek, one to the lookout ridge, she posted a simple wooden plaque. "Briggs Path, in honor of loyalty without condition." Sometimes, the ones who stay, quietly, without reward, are the ones who save us, not through grand gestures, but by simply being there when it matters most. Briggs didn't need words to prove his love. Nora didn't need a blood tie to be a mother. And Lila didn't need a perfect beginning to deserve a beautiful future. In a world that often feels broken, this story reminds us that healing begins with kindness, loyalty, and the courage to stay when others walk away. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to let us know your favorite moment. And if you believe in second chances and quiet miracles, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe for more true stories that restore faith in love, in family, and in the silent heroes among us. May God bless you and those you love.